There were 4 of them on the platform at Iron Ridge Station, and Clara Voss knew before the train stopped which one she was. The other 3 were younger, the youngest perhaps 22, the oldest no more than 30, and they had the particular quality of women who have prepared for an occasion, which was to say their traveling clothes were pressed and their hair was arranged, and they were holding themselves with the conscious posture of a person aware that they are being evaluated. Clara was 43, and her traveling clothes were clean but not pressed, and her hair was pinned simply because simply was how she wore it. And she was not holding herself with any particular posture, because she had been done with performing for evaluation somewhere around her 35th year, and had not gone back to it. She stood at the far end of the platform with her trunk and her carpet bag, and she watched the other 3 women arrange themselves with the quiet attention of a woman who has been reading situations her whole life, and is in the habit of reading them accurately. The man who came down the station steps was not what she expected, though she could not have said what she expected. He was large, broad through the chest and shoulder in the way of men who work rather than merely exist, and he moved with the particular economy of a man who knows exactly where he is going and does not have opinions about it. He looked at the 3 younger women first. Clara watched him look. She watched him go still in the way a careful man goes still when something is not what he anticipated. Then he turned, and he looked at her. He walked straight to her. If something just moved in your chest, subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Because what happened next on that platform in Iron Ridge, Montana, in the autumn of 1885, and what it cost both of them before it was settled, is the kind of story you do not put down until it is finished. Clara Voss had been born Clara Brandt in 1842 in a farmhouse in central Ohio, the 3rd of 7 children, and she had arrived at womanhood with the particular competence of a woman who was never the most remarkable person in a room, but was reliably the most capable one. She had married Edmund Voss at 22, a good man, a steady man, a farmer and occasional surveyor who had loved her plainly and kept his word in all things, large and small, for 21 years. He had died in March 1884, sitting in his chair after supper, without warning and without suffering, which was, she had decided after the grief had settled into something she could carry, the most Edmund Voss thing he had ever done. She was 42. Her children were grown and established in their own lives across 3 states, and she was standing alone in a farmhouse in Ohio that she could not afford to keep, and did not particularly wish to keep without Edmund in it. She had seen the advertisement in the Kansas City paper, forwarded by her daughter, who had seen it and forwarded it without comment, which was its own form of commentary. A rancher in Montana required a capable woman, steady, no objection to hard work, willing to make a permanent arrangement. Age not specified. Clara had read it twice. Then she had written the letter. The agency's go-between, a Mrs. Draper out of Chicago, had written back promptly and efficiently, and had described the posting in Beartooth Valley, Montana, the ranch, the man, the arrangement terms, with the brisk competence of a woman who managed many such transactions and was not sentimental about them. She had not mentioned other candidates. Clara had understood, correctly, that there would be others. She had come anyway. The man on the platform was Rowan Mast, and he said so directly, without preamble, when he reached her, his name, his hand extended, his eyes on her face, with a quality of assessment she recognized as the same quality she used herself, looking at a thing to understand it, not to measure it against something else. She said, "Clara Voss." She shook his hand. He had a working man's hand, which she had expected, and a dry grip, which she noted. He said, There are 3 other women from the same train. I know, she said. He said, the agency sent 4 names. Yours was first on the list. She had not known this. She did not let it show. She said, I wasn't aware of the order. He said, I was, and picked up her trunk. Behind them, she was aware, without looking, that the 3 younger women were watching. She was also aware, with the same peripheral attention, of the woman who had come to the station with Rowan, a Mrs. Draper, she would learn, who had traveled from Chicago to oversee the arrangements, and who was standing near the station door with the expression of a woman whose expectations had been precisely and inconveniently disrupted. Clara noted this too. She stored it. The wagon ride out to the Beartooth Valley took 40 minutes on a road that ran between ridges of dark pine. The first gold of September just beginning to show in the aspens along the creek. Rowan drove without talking, which she did not find uncomfortable. She had spent 21 years with a man who talked when he had something to say and not otherwise, and she had come to understand silence as a form of respect rather than absence. She looked at the country. It was large country. The sky was the particular blue of autumn at altitude, very clear, very final. The hired hand Birch was waiting at the ranch when they arrived. A lean, weathered man of perhaps 55, who had the eyes of someone who had been watching Rowan Mast for long enough to have opinions about what was good for him. He looked at Clara the way he might look at a horse someone had brought home, assessing for soundness, not beauty. He said, "You're not what I expected." She said, "Most people aren't." He laughed, a short, surprised sound, as though laughter had caught him off guard. He picked up her carpet bag before she could and said, "Kitchen's through here," and she understood, from the way he said it, that the kitchen was where the assessment would continue and that she was being given the chance to pass it. The kitchen was the kitchen of a man who had been feeding himself adequately for 6 years without particular interest in the endeavor. The stove was iron and serviceable, but cold. It had been built up this morning and gone to coals by noon, and not rekindled. The work surfaces were clean in the way of surfaces wiped down by a person who is thorough but not tending. Nothing soaking, nothing rising, nothing in progress. A pot on the shelf held the dried beans she would later identify as the household's primary form of nutrition, taken in rotation with dried beef and biscuits made without lard because no one had thought to specify lard on the last supply order. There was a window above the basin that faced west. Through it, she could see the kitchen garden. Or what had been the kitchen garden. 6 years of untended ground had returned it mostly to grass, but the bones of it were still there. The raised beds, the stone borders, the iron stakes where climbing things had once been trained. In the far corner, against the fence, something was still growing. She could not identify it from the window. She did not ask about it. She rolled up her sleeves and began. Birch reappeared at the kitchen door 40 minutes later, drawn by the smell before he was aware he was being drawn, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the pot on the stove, the way a man looks at something he has been missing without knowing he was missing it. She had found an onion at the back of the cold box, a quarter tin of dried thyme on the shelf, and enough salt pork to make the beans into something rather than simply beans. She said, without turning around, "It'll be another hour." He said, "I'll wait," and sat down at the table. Rowan came in from the barn at the hour and ate without comment, which was fine. She had not cooked for comment. She had cooked because the household required feeding, and she was here, and it was the first evening, and she was not going to let the first evening be a bowl of dried beef eaten in separate rooms. He finished 1 bowl. He accepted a second when she set it in front of him, and she watched him eat the second with a slight change in pace that told her the first bowl had been about hunger and the second was about something else. about the smell that had filled the kitchen when the time went in, or the warmth from the stove, or simply the fact that there was a woman in this kitchen again, and the kitchen had not forgotten what that was supposed to feel like. She sat at the other end of the table with her own bowl and her own portion of silence, and they ate together without speaking, and the fire in the stove made its sound, and outside the last of the autumn light went out over the ridgeline. She was alone in the kitchen that night after he had gone to bed. She sat at the table with a cup of tea she had found the makings for in the back of the highest shelf, an elderly tin of leaves, probably Edmund's vintage. She noted with a dry amusement that it served her well for 21 years, and she sat with the day. The platform. His hand extended. Yours was first on the list. The three younger women behind her and Mrs. Draper's face. She had come to Montana prepared to be passed over. She had prepared herself carefully for it, the way a person prepares for a thing they believe will happen so it does not flatten them when it does. And then he had walked past the others and reached her and picked up her trunk. She sat with that. It was a large thing to sit with, and she was glad she was sitting with it alone, because she was not a woman who showed her inside workings to people she had known for 6 hours, and the inside workings on this particular evening were considerable. She had allowed herself exactly this one evening. Then she was back. She found the garden's secret the following morning. She had gone out at first light to understand the ground, to see what the soil was and what might be salvaged from the raised beds, and in the far corner of the garden, against the fence, she found what she had seen from the window. Roses, 3 of them, very old. The canes sprawling and tangled and in urgent need of attention, but alive. The kind of alive that means the root system goes down further than anyone has bothered to measure, and the plant has made its own decisions about whether to continue. The canes were heavy with the last of the season's hips, and the wood underneath the sprawl was sound. She crouched beside them for a long time. Birch found her there. He came around the corner of the fence and stopped when he saw her, and she heard him stop, and she looked up, and he had an expression she had not seen on him yet. Something careful, something that was deciding whether to speak. She said, "These are old plants," he said. "Margaret put them in, Rowan's wife." He paused. "She died 1879. He hasn't touched the garden since." She looked at the roses. She said, "They're not finished." He looked at them too. After a moment he said, "No, they're not." She pruned the worst of the dead wood that morning, not a full pruning. That was a winter job, but enough to let the plant breathe. She did not tell Rowan she had done it. She did not mention it at supper. He came in from the barn at dusk, and she set food on the table, and he sat, and he did not look out the window toward the garden, which was how she knew he had already looked and had seen, and was deciding what to do with the seeing. He put extra wood on the porch beside the kitchen door that night. She heard him do it. She had already been in bed, and she lay still and listened to the careful sound of it, the methodical placement of split wood, the deliberate quiet of a man who is doing something he does not intend to announce. She did not say anything in the morning. Neither did he. That was how they established, without discussion, the grammar of their arrangement. Birch told her, on the 4th day, about Margaret. He told her the way people tell things they have been carrying for a long time, not all at once, not in the order it happened, but in pieces, as though each piece required the weight of the previous one before it could be set down. Margaret had been a gardener, a reader, a woman with strong opinions about the order of meals and the proper way to bank a fire. She had died in January 1879, 6 hours after the baby, and Rowan had not spoken her name to another person since the burial. Birch said this plainly, without drama. He said it the way facts get said when the person saying them needs you to have the information and trusts you to carry it carefully. She said, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "He's going to be difficult." She said, "I've had difficult." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, I expect you have." Mrs. Draper arrived on the Friday stage. She came with a letter from the agency, written on official letterhead, which she placed on the kitchen table with the decisive motion of a woman who believes documents settle things. She was not unpleasant about it. She was, in fact, elaborately pleasant, with the particular pleasantness of a person who is doing something they have decided to frame as a kindness. She said there had been a clerical error. She said that Rowan's posting had been matched in the agency's records to a Miss Annabelle Fry of St. Louis, 26 years old, and that Clara's posting had been intended for a different ranch in a different valley, a situation that could be rectified without difficulty if everyone agreed to be sensible. Clara looked at the letter. She said, "Is Mr. Mast aware you're here?" Mrs. Draper said she had thought it best to speak with Clara first, woman to woman. Clara said, "I see." Mrs. Draper said, with the gentleness of a woman delivering an inevitable truth, that the agency had a responsibility to its clients, and that Mr. Mast was entitled to the match that had been arranged for him, and that Clara surely understood that a man of Rowan's position, with a working ranch to manage, required a certain, and here she paused, with the particular pause of a person selecting a word with care, vitality, the word settled in the kitchen. Clara looked at it. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you could do in a moment like this was give it more than it deserved. She said, "I'll let Mr. Mast know you're here." She went to the door of the kitchen and called for Rowan. He came from the barn in 2 minutes, still carrying the thing he'd been working on, a piece of harness leather he was restitching, the needle still in it, and he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Mrs. Draper, and then at Clara, and then back at Mrs. Draper, with the expression of a man who has walked into a situation and is rapidly and accurately assessing it. Mrs. Draper explained the clerical error. She was thorough. She presented the letter. She described the intended match. Rowan said nothing until she was finished. Then he set the harness leather on the table beside the agency letter, and he said, "I read 4 names and chose one. The one I chose is here. The arrangement is made." Mrs. Draper said there were contractual considerations. Rowan said, "I'll hear those from a judge, not an agent. You're welcome to pursue it if you choose." Mrs. Draper looked at Clara. The look was the kind of look that is meant to find a crack, and there was no crack to find. Clara looked back at her with the expression of a woman who has been looking back at things her whole life and has not yet found one that required her to look away. Mrs. Draper left on the afternoon stage. But she did not leave quietly. She had the afternoon, and she used it. By the time the stage pulled out, she had spoken to the postmaster, the dry goods proprietor, and the woman who ran the boarding house in Iron Ridge, and what she had left behind, not a lie exactly, but an arrangement of truths that produced a false impression, was the suggestion that the situation at the Mast Ranch was irregular, that the arrangement was not what it appeared, and that a woman of Clara's age and circumstances had maneuvered herself into a position she was not entitled to, and would shortly be required to vacate. Iron Ridge was not a large town. A suggestion like that had a short distance to travel. Clara heard it the following Saturday at the dry goods store, in the particular way you hear things in small towns, not directly, but in the pause before a greeting, the slight adjustment of a woman's posture, the conversation that stopped 2 seconds before she reached it. She bought what she needed, and she carried it to the wagon herself, and she did not speed up or change her face. And she drove the 40 minutes back to the ranch, with her hands steady on the reins, and the October sky very blue and very high above the Beartooth ridgeline. She was unloading the wagon when Rowan came from the barn. He looked at her face. She said, "Mrs. Draper left some words behind in town." He said, "I know." Birch heard. She set the flour sack down on the wagon bed and looked at him. There was something she needed to say, and she needed to say it plainly, the way she said everything. She said, "If this arrangement is going to cause you trouble in this valley, I want to know it now rather than later." He said, "It's not causing me trouble." She said, "Rowan." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man avoiding, the quiet of a man finding the right words, which was different. He said, "I came to that station, and I read your name first, and I came to find you specifically, and I chose this specifically. Mrs. Draper does not have a vote in that." He paused. "The valley will sort itself out. It always does." She looked at him. He was looking at the mountain beyond the barn, which was how he said things that mattered, with his eyes somewhere else so she could take the words without having to manage what her face was doing. She understood this about him. She had been understanding him for 11 days, and some people take years and some take minutes, and Rowan Mast had taken 11 days, which she found reasonable. She picked up the flour sack and carried it inside. The church gathering that settled matters happened 3 weeks later, at the Iron Ridge Harvest Assembly, the one occasion in the autumn calendar when the entire valley came in from the ranches and sat in the same room, which meant it was also the occasion when the valley's current opinion about any given thing became visible all at once. Mrs. Draper had returned from Chicago specifically for it. She was not a woman who left things unfinished. She sat in the third row with the 3 younger brides, 2 of whom had been matched to ranchers in the valley and were present with their husbands, one of whom had gone back east, and she watched the assembly with the attentiveness of a person waiting for the right moment. The right moment arrived when the assembly's business turned to community matters, and a man near the back said, with the deliberate casualness of something rehearsed, that he understood there was some question about the arrangements at the Mast Ranch, and whether the valley ought to have a concern about how such arrangements were being conducted. The room went the particular quiet of a room that has been waiting for something to be said out loud. Rowan Mast stood up. He was not a man who spoke at gatherings. He had not spoken at one in 6 years, and the room felt the weight of his standing, the particular quality of a man who uses silence so consistently that when he breaks it, the break means something. He said, "I'll address the Mast Ranch arrangements directly." He spoke without heat, without performance, the flat, careful voice of a man reporting facts he has verified personally. "I went to Iron Ridge Station in September, and I chose Clara Voss, not by default, not by error, not by any calculation other than that she was the name I had been given first, and she came, and she was exactly what her letter said she was." He looked at the room, all of it, steadily. "She has kept my house, restored a kitchen that had not been properly kept in 6 years, and she has been more honest with me in 11 weeks than most people manage in a year." A pause. "She is also going to be my wife, if she'll have me, and I expect this valley to behave accordingly." The room was still. Birch, from the far left bench, said, without looking up, "About time." 3 or 4 people laughed, the short, releasing laugh of a room that has been holding its breath. Mrs. Draper looked at her hands. The man near the back who had asked the question looked at the floor. The woman beside him, his wife, turned and looked at Clara with an expression that was not hostile, that was, in fact, something closer to recognition, as though she had been watching and had seen enough to have formed a different opinion than the one she had arrived with. Clara sat in the fourth row and looked at Rowan's back and thought about the platform at Iron Ridge Station, the four of them in a line, and the way he had walked past the others without stopping. She thought he knew what he was doing. She thought he knew what he was doing. The roses came back in the spring with a ferocity that suggested they had been waiting for permission. Clara pruned them properly in February, in the cold, kneeling in the frozen garden with her good scissors and a clear understanding of what the plant needed, which was for someone to take it seriously. By May they were heavy with buds, and by June the corner of the garden smelled the way Birch said the garden had smelled when Margaret was alive, strong and sweet and completely without apology. Rowan stood at the garden fence one evening in June and looked at the roses for a long time. Clara was on the other side of the garden, tying the bean stakes, and she did not hurry toward him or say anything, because she had learned that he needed the space to have a feeling without an audience, and she had learned to give him that space the way she gave most things, completely, without calling attention to the giving. After a while, he said, without turning, "Margaret would have liked you." She did not stop tying the stakes. She said, "I think I would have liked her." He said, "Yes, I think you would have." The silence after that had the particular quality of a thing that has been held for a long time and has finally been set down in the right place. Not resolved, exactly, but settled, which is different and better. She tied the last stake. He stayed at the fence. The June light on the Beartooth ridgeline was the long, lavish light of the northern summer, the kind that makes the mountains look as though they have been recently invented. 14 years later, their daughter, Margaret Clara Mast, called Meg, born in the autumn of 1887, a large girl with her father's eyes and her mother's hands, was married in the garden in June with the roses in full bloom along the fence, and Clara stood beside Rowan in the grass they had kept together and watched the whole valley come to witness it. She had been 43 years old on a station platform in Iron Ridge, the oldest in a line of women waiting to be chosen, wearing unpressed traveling clothes and holding herself with no particular posture. Because she had arrived at the station the same way she arrived at everything, as herself, without performance, taking up every inch of the space she occupied and offering no apology for it. She had been chosen first, not despite what she was, because of it.